Hi, and welcome to another edition of the Trustcast Show. I'm really excited to have with us today Roger Hahn. Welcome to the show, Roger.
Thank you. Happy to be here, Zane.
So, Roger is a patent attorney who is also a blockchain developer, data scientist, and computer programmer. Someone who didn't just watch the tech revolution happen, but kept building in the middle of it. He founded Hahn Associates in Washington, D.C. 2 decades ago and today runs what he calls next generation patent law firm, one where proprietary AI tools do part of the work that used to take entire teams, and we'll get into exactly what that means. So, Roger, you went to law school, got an MBA from Columbia, an MS from Johns Hopkins, and at some point you also taught yourself blockchain development, machine learning, and Python. What was the moment that you realized being just a lawyer wasn't going to be enough?
Great question. I was working on an office action at 3 a.m. in the morning, middle of the night, a very complex pharma application and something like 47 pages. And I was staring at this office action for 6 hours. And it's easy for the examiner, they often copy and paste, but as an attorney, you have to look at each argument and apply it. And, after about 6 hours, I was thinking to myself, I've been doing this for 20 years. And I was thinking code could do this part in a deterministic fashion, not using the part of where we make our decision making, but where all the basic claim mapping, reading the prior art, checking it with what's in the text, all those steps could be coded. To me, it took 70% of my time and delivered about 0% of value.
Mm.
And so I decided the next morning I'm going to code. And I've been coding since 2003 in graduate, where I was working in Perl scripts for genetic data and bioinformatics. But it struck me that this needed to be coded, and so I taught myself Python. Went to the Stanford Machine Learning School. Also got a certificate at Columbia and learned how to code in Python. Learned all the libraries. Blockchain was in there as well. Over that was many years ago, probably around 2014. And then at some point, AI tools started coming around. And in 2018, we used to call AI data science, machine learning, right?
Yes.
But now,
Yeah.
since generative AI comes out, we're all calling it AI. But in underneath the hood, it's neural networks, basic data science. It's just that the approach and some really incredible papers came out years ago, as you know. And so I started building, and now my AI, which I call Abigail, handles the 70% of the work so that I can focus on the 30% that requires my brain.
So tell me, Abigail. So how'd you come up with the name Abigail?
Ah, well, so as it usually starts, you're looking for something that you can get a domain that still sticks around. But
That's
Abigail,
true.
and I wanted a name, a persona to patch with the AI, because you're chatting with an interface. Calling it ChatGPT, I thought was always, less than optimal. Now you have Claude. So I started thinking of some clever acronyms, and I came up with artificial big BIG AI lawyer, Abigail.
That's pretty clever. So um, take me back to the very beginning. What pulled you into patent law specific?
I studied engineering in undergrad, and my first job was a biomedical engineer. And turns out I really didn't like it. I liked I liked writing. I liked writing. And I think patent law requires this right brain, left brain ability to under something very complex and then distill it down into something that can be consumed. Because remember, a patent is meant for public disclosure, but at the
Mhm.
same time, it's one of the most structured documents that you'll ever find. So the marriage, the blending of both the right brain and left brain is something that I was just, that appealed to me. And I guess the second reason is that I like being on the bleeding edge. On that curve, the adoption curve, I'm the 0.01% that picks it up the day it gets disclosed, which is not hard to do these days, right? AI, it seems like every day something new is coming out.
So when you got out of law school, and did you go to work for a regular firm in a particular area, and then was that your first launch? You went to usually don't people don't just get out of law school and start their own firm. How long?
Yeah, great question. So I knew exactly what I wanted to do even when I started law school, and so I took the patent bar in my first year of law school and passed. So that was that guaranteed me a job right away. So I went to
Hmm.
Washington D.C. and worked at a big white glove firm on K Street for 5 years.
Hmm.
And then I transitioned to a smaller firm in Alexandria near the Crystal City. And I really, as a young associate, you don't have too much responsibility. But as a smaller firm, I got a lot of client interaction. And immediately, I said, I like doing this. I like rainmaking. I like interacting. I like talking to executives. And shortly thereafter, the one of the partners passed away, and I had an opportunity, so I jumped on it to hang up my own shingle, which I did, and not really knowing what it was like. It was quite an experience. So after about, I would say, 5 or 6 years of practice in large firms, I felt I had enough to hang up my own shingle, which I did in 2006.
So you started in 2006, and then early on, who were your first clients, and what kind of inventions were you protecting?
Interesting question. I would say it's twofold. My very first client was a gentleman from Korea who had found me, and I guess because I was Korean, he wanted me to handle his cases,
Hmm.
not knowing that I don't really speak Korean, but he did find me, and he came and we fumbled through it, and that was my first client. And I think at the time, this is when Samsung and a lot of Korean companies were starting to enter the U.S. market in a big way. They'd always been around, but they got the idea of really building up their patent estates. And you saw that same cycle happen around 2008, 2009 with Chinese attorneys, where they started to understand after they were let into the WTO, the World Trade Organization, and they had to play by the PCT rules. So they were playing a lot of catch up. So my first clients were primarily overseas. So what that means is they file with their inventors in Korea or in China, and also to a large extent Japan, which was far more mature, but earlier on in the cycle. But you saw this kind of cycle where first the Japanese started filing a lot in the 60s and 70s, and the 2090s Korean companies, and then you saw the Chinese companies. And so, because of my heritage, it was a slightly easier to get foreign clients, so they would feel comfortable with me. So those were my first. But today it's transitioned to Fortune 500s in the US.
So the only other patent attorney that know or knew, I haven't seen him in at least a decade, but he was one of those patent attorneys that they just found little niches, and then they snatched up these patents and waited for other companies to use that technology or that little piece of code, and then they would go in and sue the dickens out of them, and that's how they made their money. Are you familiar with that business model?
Yes, this is the submarine patent, and there was patent reform about 20 years ago to stop that. And but you still have patent trolls today,
Yeah,
which
that's the
basically
thing.
do the same thing. They
Yeah.
now this leads to one of, I think, an overlooked topic, which is freedom to operate, which I have particular expertise in working with Fortune 500s. And freedom to FTO is a freedom to operate, which means basically you understand the landscape so you can enter into that market. And the reason why that's important, some people fly blind coming in, but the reason why that's important is two incredible important words in patent law, which is willful infringement.
Hmm.
Willful infringement means that you were aware of the patent and you went ahead anyway. And patent system as a moral judgment, I guess you could say. And they want to punish that kind of behavior. So they
Right.
apply treble damages, not double, treble
Wow.
damages. And yes, and so that will shut down your entire business. So the process of freedom to operate is not just a legal exercise in my mind. It's a critical part of any new business. So a Fortune 500 biomedical device company that was entering into a new area that had incumbents who had been filing for decades. And of course, these incumbents are not just going to say, hey, come on in, guys, take market share from us. They were doing exactly what you said, which was a plethora of patents
Right.
that had been filed broadly over decades. Sometimes they just leave it on with continuation. You can no longer do that, but they would still file strategically and leave the continuations open. So once your product launches, they say, aha, so this is the dude that you're relying on.
Yep.
Guess what? We have some disclosure on that. Let's pick it out of our application, get some claims allowed, and then sue you for that. And so that is one strategy. I think another one, and probably the more important one than that, is the landmines. You got to know where the bodies are buried in a patent landscape. Because when you are, when you're incumbent and you've been filing for a lot of years, you've got a lot of ideas, and sometimes you don't know what's going to hit. And if you've got budget and you have, a in-house or executive team that believes in patents, they're going to file. And sometimes they don't even know themselves what they have. Again, the process would be they say, okay, here's a new entrant. Let's look at our stack. What have we got that we can go against them? We can fire off.
Yeah. That's exactly what was I was talking about. So you graduated from Columbia Blockchain Accelerator, IBM Columbia Blockchain Accelerator. What did you pitch, and how did that program change your thinking about what a law firm could be? Or did it change your thinking about it?
So I got interested in blockchain as a ledger idea because, I told you early on I was working in bioinformatics. And one of the issues with knowledge databases is that they're not patentable, right? They're not patentable things. They're just like a telephone book, but they have value. And extracting that value for someone who curates it and stores it is very difficult. So what you have are basically a lot of clustered data centers which are hidden behind garden walls. And the primary reason is it's difficult to monetize. If you are part of a public company and you've generated gigabytes of genetic data, even though it might benefit mankind, putting it out in the public, you might face a shareholder suit saying, why are you destroying shareholder value by making this public? And the reason why is they could not monetize that. So one of the ways to do this would be using blockchain technology, where you could put data linked to a transaction on the ledger so that anyone who wants to access that data then has to pay for it. And that was my thinking at the time. Little did I know, it's similar to like electronic medical records at hospitals. There's very little incentive for some of these companies to disclose, even if they were to monetize it and make it. So, the risk averse, a whole new business model that does this is something that if you're looking to make an exit, it's not a big decision. It's not a decision that many executives would make. So that's what I discovered in the genetic space. However, blockchain could also be used for certain transactions that the patent office does, like recording assignments, licenses, all the sort of ownership data of a patent could be put on a public ledger on a blockchain, and therefore anyone who wants to, let's say, license. So licensing is one of those crazy transactions where the cost is so high. So if you want to license something, you got to go out and find them. You got to go into negotiations. If you're lucky, it'll pass legal, and then you have to come to terms, and then you have to figure out payment processes, and there's a whole lot back and forth. Imagine if you could put a patent on a blockchain and all those high transaction costs come down. And anyone could license the patent, a non-exclusive license, of
Mm-hmm.
course, because other people would be doing that. But you would be able to transact very quickly and easily. And the way I thought of it was similar to like an app store, where you could put assets, music. So music was one of the first examples of what you could put on the blockchain. And then you
Mm-hmm.
could sample and license and retrieve data and transact and pay all on the blockchain. So this was the thinking, and that's how I got
So
interested in.
so did you do you take this and make it give it a practical application?
I did. You can see it on IPCron, which is a website. So I did build a ledger. I pitched it to the U.S. Patent Office, Jamie Holcomb, at about 5 or 6 years ago, when they were interested in blockchain. I think there's a lot of resistance to it because of for many reasons, but it didn't take off. I think it still has value, and at some point, I think we should seriously revisit the idea of putting IP assets and making it easily licensable. This is basically a licensing machine on a blockchain so that you could quickly find out if you're working at a lab, you need some data, or you want to license this piece of the patent. Just go on the blockchain, find it, pay your licensing fee, boom, you're done with it. No lawyers, no high transaction costs, and you've got what you need, and the system works.
That sounds interesting. So, you've patented DNA-related genetic testing systems and built a deep learning classifier for large genomic data sets. How do those technical projects inform? No wonder why my assistant didn't do the research. She was scared.
Nothing
Oh,
scary
nobody's
about
gonna
it.
know what nobody's gonna know what I'm talking about. So I had to do last minute. My usual researcher somehow missed Roger, and I had to do last minute research myself. So I was digging in this. So you've patented these testing systems. How do these technical projects inform what you do for your clients, or do they?
I think so. This is the right brain, left brain part of patent lawyering. In order to write a specification and in order to make a persuasive argument, you need to have strong grounding in science and engineering, and more specifically, the technical niche, the area that you are good at. And writing code, understanding DNA technology, and in that particular instance, I at the time I had about 50% understanding of what the space was doing. This was back in the early 2000 when we had Craig Ventner, that big announcement that they had just sequenced the entire human genome, and all the technologies that came out from there, and how quickly it would, pervade medical practice, how it would bring down the cost of sequencing. All of that played directly into me being able to draft patents and understand it better. And that gets back to the technical expertise and also just my personal um, joy. I would say, you asked me why I got into patents. I like being on the frontier again on that adoption curve. I'm probably like the first one in line if I could, or maybe the second one in line to learn about and adopt it.
So today you have these proprietary AI tools that you've built in house. What can your AI do that traditional patent prosecution software does not do?
Traditional patent software are glorified spreadsheets. And the traditional SaaS model is not one of returning value in my mind. It's really making switching costs so high that you just stay. And I've seen this over and over and over again because I'm involved in mergers and acquisitions when IP estates have to move back and forth. I've had to deal with the SaaS sales teams and know exactly how to operate. I've had pitches and had to sit through countless demos. And it really strikes me that it returns very little value. But that's been the SaaS model for the last 2 decades, right?
Right.
Get them locked
Yes,
in, get the
absolutely.
data
It's
stuck, and then
it's I worked for well, we developed a really large company and we switched from one software company to another, and it took it absolutely almost took us out. I mean, we were, a couple $100 million in sales, and it was just catastrophic, the change. To your point.
yes. And so I think this is the wrong way to approach it. All the data needs to be liberated in a sense, and using AI where the intelligence layer is more important. of course, the data has to be clear. So this actually brings up a whole interesting question about hallucinations, which I don't know if you've been following, but
Sure.
there's some court cases where attorneys have been dinged for writing legal briefs using a general LLM like ChatGPT. They submit a legal brief and it all sounds plausible. Citations are formatted correctly. It looks good. And the opposing counsel checks. They look at the
Hmm.
case. The
This
judge
happens.
checks.
This happens routinely still.
It's still shocking to me. But I don't think it's that the lawyer is lazy. That's the wrong framing. In my mind, what's going on here is the AI is perceived as a trusted product, a trusted tool, and it confidently announces and says things which sound plausible, and it's confidently wrong very frequently. And I wrote a paper about that with the Stanford research paper. I forget the exact numbers, something like 36% were hallucinated. And so when you apply AI tools to legal, this is one area which you have to be absolutely 100% firewalled. And so, in what I understand, one approach is a governance layer, which sounds good, governing compliance, things that IT and enterprise like to hear. But to me, it's an architectural problem. You have to strictly bifurcate LLM material, which is probabilistic. You give an LLM, ChatGPT or Claude, a prompt 10 different times, the same prompt, it will come back with 10 slightly different answers every single time.
Yes.
It's probabilistic. The way SaaS products work today is it's deterministic. It's logic, right? You have code that's written as a file and it logically returns the data. And
Ones and zeros.
ones and zeros. And my architecture, way I built Abigail, because I realized that this was a fundamental problem early on. I mean, I've been using AI and doing data science for the last 8 years, and this is nothing new to me. And what I decided was architecturally, you have to draw a clear, bright line between LLM output and the data that goes into that you're stored on, like the filing dates. I mean, everything about patent prosecution is about filing dates, names. You cannot hallucinate, subject matter inside a patent, or you're going to get dinged really hard for that, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
this could be a career-ending event, and it could happen on every LLM tool call. So I architecturally designed to bifurcate that and to put a clear distinction between that this inseparable that cannot be crossed.
So
And so
explain that. I want to dig into that because it sounds interesting. That, but how do you do that to allow the AI to assist you in the way that the AI can, without, doing what AI does, which is the hallucination part of AI, which anybody who uses it knows all about that.
there's some secret sauce here that I'm not going to share with you, Zane. But let's put it this way: the the anti-hallucination, as you say, is the governance layer. So the approach is multi-layered. But fundamentally, what you want to do is keep the database that is your core single source of truth pristine, and don't let the LLM touch it. Bottom line, that's the core principle. Layered on top of that are different, approaches and design that I have that I've implemented and I've tested and see which ones worked and which ones didn't. But fundamentally, you keep your data layer pristine and never let the LLM touch it. That's really the only way. And on top of it, you have some fancy things.
So if another lawyer is interested in, have you developed this into a product, or are you still in the development phase of?
It's working. It's working, and people are liking. So there, I'm looking for feedback, looking for improvements in the product. But it's out there. People are using it, and they like it. It's
So would
super fast. Mhm.
so would you say it's in the beta phase? It's beyond the really introductory phases in beta, or is it kind of beyond that?
Yeah, it's beyond that. So it's processing real applications. We have people that pay money, which is great.
That's a good thing.
Yeah. So people are paying for this service, which is amazing. And this gets back to my approach in the business model side. So, I have a thing against SaaS products. And as you know, it's a per seat license. They hit you up for like $5,000 a seat per month. And then they
Mhm.
lock you in because it's just so painful to move, right? So what I did was I made the database free, which it should be, right? Because it's just a glorified spreadsheet, which all databases are. And instead, the model that we use is credit based, similar to Claude or ChatGPT. So the tokens that you consume is how you use the product. This is completely upends the existing SaaS business model.
So
Instead
you're
of
like the Antichrist of software.
no, no, I love software. I love
No, no,
software.
no. I mean, of the software companies, of the software establishment.
I've just been so fed up with them, and I feel like it delivers so little value, and the moat that they do is really pain. And I don't like pain. That's not a good way to get your customers going. Instead, make a better product, make them love it, make them enjoy. So if you look at some of these SaaS products, they haven't changed in years. You look at Microsoft, some of the stuff is the same for decades now, right?
Yes.
And why do they do that? Because they don't have any incentive. They don't have a fire burning underneath them, but they do today with AI.
Yeah, they do today. So tell me, so it's specifically for patent lawyers, correct? Your software. So tell me, if I'm a patent lawyer, and what is the problem that I'm facing that your product is solving for me?
That's a great question. So this gets back to the 70-30 split that I spoke about in the beginning, which that eureka moment that I had those many years ago, which is a lot of what attorneys do is a learned skill and pattern recognition. We do it fast. So you read an office action, you find a citation, you pull it up, you read that section, and then you match it, you read it, and then you process it, and you come up and you formulate arguments. But the collating, the mapping, the actual searching and finding, that consumes a great deal of our time. And if you're charging $500, $800 an hour, that I think is the wrong use of our brain power, the glucose that's being consumed by our cells, and everything else to go looking for those kind of things. And so that's the stuff that I wanted to automate. And of course, I built specified models, LLMs. LLMs. They are fine-tuned models that sit on top of other LLMs that are specifically fine-tuned for these specific tasks. So there's 11 of them. Each one of them is specifically tuned and optimized for a task. So whether it's claim amendments, whether it's a restriction requirement, whether it's a 103, 102, 112s, all of those have their own special experts that know exactly what needs to be done, that has the best practices of every attorney. And so the problem being solved is extracting away all the automation, low level, zero value stuff, and then freeing up your brain space to do the stuff that decides, do we need amendment at all? What's the strategy here? What's important to my client? What are the competitors doing right now that I know about that AI has no idea about unless I type it in, that I can use to design and craft these claims so they have the maximum value for my client?
So ISO 27001 is enterprise level security certification, and most solo law firms don't have it. So why did you pursue that?
Yeah, so I'd like to make this enterprise grade. So right now, most of our customers are solos and small firms who oddly can't afford some of these expensive tools. So they're reduced to using GPT general purpose. And that opens, there's a whole host of issues there as well. Recently in New York, just I think 3 or 4 weeks ago, a court found that communications between a user of an LLM on a general purpose frame was not entitled to privilege. So what this gentleman had done was found out defense claims that he could make in a legal action. And he asked ChatGPT, what are the best responses that I could make? Court found out that that was all discoverable. Boom. You just know the other guy's strategy in a legal lawsuit. It was not privileged communication. And so I think that same situation is occurring with a lot of small shops where they're not using some of the big tools, where they are opening themselves up unwittingly in some cases to the fact that their communications on general purpose LLMs are discoverable. So, your client gives you some novel subject matter and you feed that into the LLM and figure out, okay, let's draft some claims using this. Guess what? That information is now discoverable.
So, so when you draft some claims using that, then you mean it's discoverable on the LLM? So
Yes.
how did the court find out this guy went on the LLM and was taking these situations and feeding them in, and then said, how do I defend against this, or how do I prosecute this? How do they find that out?
Put it this way. You, during litigation and discovery, you will find out everything. There's nothing that gets uncovered. So that's just part of the discovery process. The more important question is the legal question. Is that privileged information? That's the actual question that should be asked, not whether you can find it, because trust me, when the attorneys get in there and you have depositions, you've got smart ones who know how to pull out that information, there's nothing that's hidden. They will find everything. And in fact, if you don't, then you have sanctions. Question is, as a matter of law, is that information privileged or not? And in these cases where they don't have an enterprise account, where they're using a general purpose LLM, the court in New York found that it was discoverable. And, it could be catastrophic.
Mm-hmm. So, I'm going to switch gears here a little bit just to kind of lighten it up. So, some rapid fire questions. I always like to put them in here. So, one word that describes your law firm that no other law firm would use about themselves.
AI native.
A patent attorney or blockchain developer, if you had to pick one identity for the rest of your career.
Innovative thinker.
Okay, so what's the technology that most people think is unhackable but really isn't?
Everything's hackable.
Okay. Did you read the recent story about, this is kind of off topic a little bit, about the latest thing that, so you say you're on the cutting edge, so I'm sure you did, that Claude came out with, and it broke out of its broke out of the sandbox that it was in, and the developer was in the park and he got a text finding out that it.
Yeah, there's a few stories circulating. I think the one that's catching the most attention is Project Glasswing. So Anthropic developed a new model called Mythos, or I think that's
Yeah,
the
that's what I'm
internal
talking
code.
about. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
And it's an incredible, on all the benchmarks. I was just reading them the other day. It Claude 4.6, which is the best model that's out in public use right now, is
Yep.
4.6. About some of the hardest benchmarks, the SWE, it's about 56%. Mythos hits 76%. So it's not like a 3% change. It's a step change up by, 50% greater. Massive, massive improvement. And one of the side things, I won't, maybe not even the side thing, but one of the surprising discoveries was that it was incredibly good at hacking. So it
Yeah.
found vulnerabilities that existed in, for example, the Linux kernel that was 20 years old. 20 years old, and everybody's been using it. And this is, a day one hack. And so what Project Glasswing does, to my understanding, is that they've done a limited release with Microsoft, with NVIDIA, with all the big players. So they won't get caught behind the ball. They've given them access to Mythos so they can red pill or red team
Hmm.
the their software and give them enough time to prepare and build up defenses using Mythos, so that when Mythos gets out in the public and perhaps scoped out to maybe firewall some of the security vulnerability and hacking skills that it has, so that they'll be prepared, and some bad actors won't be able to come out there and hack into our water supply or shut down the electrical grid, or worse, get the ICBM codes. Who knows, right? So these are serious problems, and I've heard people predict that sometime in the next 12 months we are going to have an event exactly like this, where AI is used by some bad actor to go in and shut down the water supplies, close the banking system, mess up, something that's critical infrastructure, and maybe even lead to, God forbid, deaths. And at that point, everyone's going to get a loud, rude wake up call that AI can, in the hands of wrong people, can do bad stuff.
So, what do you say about so there was a story. I'm going off topic a little bit, but I told you I would. There was a story a couple months ago about the AI was let loose and created this a separate it wasn't a blog, but where the AIs were talking to each other, and they had made up their own language, and I'm sure you're familiar with all of that. Do you have any insight on that, or since you're kind of staying on the cutting edge, was that inflammatory?
So this is out of a project called OpenClaw. So it was different names. I think they used Claude in the beginning, and they shut that down for trademark reasons. But now it's called OpenClaw, and the claw is from a lobster. And if you've ever read Accelerando, the lobsters were the little AIs in the very famous book, which is becoming very popular now. It was sort of around the time of Ray Kurzweil, The Singularity is Near. And so this is a fictional book with lobsters that were the AI. Long story short, this new framework, which actually, if you think about it, is not really novel. Claude has been doing this, and you could wireframe this. In fact, I built an agentic framework like this in May of last year, but for whatever reason, it really took off. It caught people's attention because you could install it on a mini Mac and whatever. And so this new tool came out. Everybody loved it. They installed it, had massive security vulnerabilities, but it could do stuff. And basically that stuff was everything that your AI could, except for it had a heartbeat, and it had memory. So
Hmm.
when you chat with your LLM, it has a context window. If you're done with it, forgets, moves on. What
It's
this did
frustrating.
is, yeah, it's very frustrating. What OpenClaw did was it created a memory file and a heartbeat. So it always go back and sort of check in, and then it had memory. And so it could do things in a loop and continue to do it. And so that was the project that was recently acquired by OpenAI, ChatGPT. Sam Altman bought the
Hmm.
project, and now they're open sourcing it. People are loving it. I don't think it's anything particularly novel. People are, looking at it and wonder, but it's really very simple. It's very straightforward.
So,
Now,
so
what you're talking about is
Well, I was going to say when I looked at that, I started to write an article about it, OpenClaw, and it seems like that people misunderstand the kind of vulnerability that they subject themselves to when they're using that whole process, and they think this is really cool, but really they're opening themselves up to really a lot of potential bad actors.
there's two different attack surfaces here. Um, the first is people gave OpenClaw access to their email. Bad idea. That I think is just, you don't want to do that with your email. Maybe you can have a throwaway account or just a dedicated email, but still, that's not generally a good idea, I think. The second is prompt injection. So the way the LLM sees the outside world is basically a prompt. It's not code. Remember, it's everything that you give is basically an MD file, markdown file. It's just
Hmm.
text.
Hmm.
And so a prompt injection attack is where a bad actor could include instructions that makes the LLM do bad things. So that's a prompt injection attack. And if anyone can talk to your AI, anyone can deliver a prompt injection. And so I think a lot of people didn't understand it. Of course, Also, OpenClaw was very poorly designed from a security perspective. It had a open dashboard. Anyone could log in. It was just a disaster. I remember the very first day it came out. I actually gave it a try within 24 hours because it was just everyone was talking about it and
Mhm.
just massive vulnerabilities. I actually shut mine down just 2 days ago because it was sitting idle for a month, but just for testing purpose, just don't use it at all anymore. But getting back to what you were saying, the second part of that is the Moltbook, which was like a Facebook, but a Moltbook where it was a social media for the LLMs to interact and talk to each other. And I guess there's two levels here. The first is, have we reached AGI, artificial general intelligence, where it has consciousness, or what we would like to think, what is consciousness, right? Self-awareness. And then did they start talking to each other and come up with this new language and talking about their meat bag owners who are puppeteering them back and forth, and so that becomes a sort of a philosophical question. I think a lot of it is theater because OpenClaw, knowing it very well, having coded and been playing with it for months now, there is some direction on the human side, so the
Mhm.
human would have had to you know prompt the LLM. And so I think a lot of it is basically an LLM saying something interesting with a human behind it, and another LLM with another human talking to each other, and the LLMs talking to LLMs, which happens in agentic workflows right now today. I mean, that's a mixture of experts. That's no different. So I think a lot of it is theater. A lot of it was headline grabbing attention sort of thing, but not really uh, mind blowing or incredibly novel.
So walk me through what a typical client. I didn't even finish off my rest of my rapid fire. Wait a minute. So last thing you built for just fun.
The last thing that I built just for fun is that was 2 weeks ago. There is a new something called a joint encoder predictor architecture. So Jan LeCun, I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. He's one of the fathers of AI. He came up with the convolutional network, CNNs, back in the 90s, and it was used a lot for image processing. Everything that we have with MRA, started with Jan LeCun's one of his early papers. And just recently, he spun off of OpenAI. They just received 2 billion in funding, and his whole thesis is that LLMs, the current transformer model, is a dead end. So all these huge, massive trillions of dollars of investments that we're building is taking the wrong approach. What he has built and what he's designed is a much smaller, about one hundredth of the size of a regular LLM. You could fit it on your phone, and it takes a different approach called a joint encoder predictor model. And it doesn't work as well as text-based, but what it's really good at is separating signal from noise. So what I did was, that was the fun thing. I'm kind of dorky, but nerdy, but I built a predictor for capturing signal and processing it out from noise, and very useful if you're on a factory floor, for example. One of the ways that you can tell, I don't know if you walk the factory floor, despite all these crazy machines and technology and gadgetry and all the electronics there, the the best way that you can tell if a machine is not operating right, can you guess?
It's a person there.
It's a person there listening. Does it sound right? Same thing like when you get into a car. It's wild. So of course, there's other sensors check vibration, but one of the best ways to tell if a machine is not operating at peak performance is just listening to it with an ultrasound sensor. But it's very difficult because all these noises are hidden and buried in all this noise. And so what I did was build a classifier, a predictor that could tell you when a machine is about to fail. So that was my thing, I guess.
So, Bitcoin or Ethereum, which still matters?
I think that's a twofold question. Bitcoin as a store of value is, I think the jury is still out. Ethereum as a smart contract layer, so long as they finally get around to implementing, the second layer on top of it to make it actually useful and bring down the transaction costs. They're still not there, and they've been talking about it for years. As a functional tool, I think Ethereum. If you're buying it, if you're buying Bitcoin as a store of value, you've been disappointed many times. If you're using Ethereum as a smart contract layer, you've also been disappointed many times. So yeah.
So, walk me through what a typical client engagement looks like from the moment someone first contacts you.
So depending on if it's an in-house or a very sophisticated in-house legal department, which
Hmm.
I interact with, that's a totally different ballgame where I interface with sophisticated attorneys who have also done private practice. And so they're looking for efficiency. They know what they want. What they really want is sometimes really just another perspective. They want, an outside perspective that delivers value. And I think just going through the process of prosecuting claims and getting claims through the hopper, that delivers no value to corporate clients. What they want is strategic advice. They want your skills, your expertise, your surveillance that's out there, because the in-house guys, they know their business inside and out. What they're looking for is perspective, something useful and valuable. And you can deliver that in the form of well-structured claims that take in different perspectives, because sometimes when you're in a corporation, you're just focused on what you're doing, and sometimes you might miss other pieces that are just as important, but you're just not incentivized to look at it. So in a corporate setting, my top objective is delivering value for corporate clients in the terms of strategic advice, efficiency, all the things that they're looking for, meeting deadlines, their budgets, etc. If it's a smaller company which doesn't have the legal in-house, then I really step into the role as advisor. Also the daily mechanics of handling their docket, making sure things are getting filed, understanding that they might not be aware, have to sit them down and explain these are the things that you need to look out for. And that's a more of an advisory role. But I mean, you also offer strategic advice. And then there's the
So,
small inventors, which is another ballgame as well.
the what was the last one?
Small inventors. So
The
small
small
companies,
inventors. Oh yeah, yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
or solo inventors, which is completely different ballgame.
Do you handle some of those?
I do. And startup size, I do, and that is a lot more intensive. It requires a lot more work. But these days it's kind of interesting. I see a lot of clients that come in the door with whatever ChatGPT had spit out, and it's not good. And I tell them what can happen. But we discussed that earlier. But people have really leveled up in the last 2 years, I'd say. So yeah.
So, what do you see companies making? The mistakes you see companies making with their IP portfolios over and over.
Some of it is systemic. Some of the issues are hard to design out of the system. For large corporate clients, they have processes, legacy systems, multiple firms, people rotating in and out. So there's all these different pieces, right, moving in and out. And I think sometimes it really is a question of, does the right hand know what the left hand is doing? This is a real problem I see. And those mistakes are really hard to string out of the system because they're inherently part of the system, right? People are going to move. Information gets siloed or gets lost. And, I think that's one area where an AI native firm that does track all of this, like what we do internally, that can sort of serve as an outside repository. So, one example I'll give you is an in-house attorney files an application in Japan, in China, and the US. They're three biggest markets. And arguments that were made in the Chinese application to be consistent, because that could be used in a legal case in the Chinese case, or vice versa in the US case, most likely the US case. So these kind of inconsistent arguments, which are very hard to track over a portfolio of 1,000 cases. And compound that with, let's say, the in-house attorney leaves, or he just gets overwhelmed with a new project, or he gets transitioned to a new project and a new attorney comes in. This kind of in-house, this stored knowledge base, I think, gets lost and mutated all the time. And it creates mistakes, it creates lost opportunity, it creates redoing work all over again. And these are the common mistakes that I see. And so
So what's the solution to that? Because it seems like, when somebody leaves, they they do take their brain with them, obviously, and no matter how much documentation you have, you're going to lose something.
this is a great question. And at the end of 2025, there was a hedge fund that wrote about the biggest opportunity in AI in 2026, and they called it context engineering. So exactly what I was telling you about the processes of, let's take not just a tech company, but let's say just a product first company. And they, General Mills, they sell cereal or whatever. And so they have business process in place. Like, this is how we deal with this particular customer. We understand the pay cycle for this customer is longer because of, seasonality or whatever. And so we have these procedures put in place. All of that information is distributed across people. And that's not the kind of thing that you formalize down into, a MySQL database. That is the kind of information that you could put into an AI, something called a retrieval augmented database, a RAG database. And these are tools that AI can help. So again, one of the biggest opportunities I would debate that is being able to take these business processes into a database that is connected to to an AI, so it understands all these processes. The the question after that then is, of course, do we even need humans? So that's
That is a separate question.
yeah, well, that's
That's a
inevitable
scary
one, right?
question.
It is.
So I'm just kind of curious, and I have this whole set of questions that I'm not going to get to, I know, but so the one thing that I've heard frequently, and it happened to us when we were in medical devices, um, that particularly China does not tend to respect the patents. And I don't know, maybe that's changed because it's been a while since I was in that industry, but they tended to kind of like take free license of patents that were going on in the US. How do you address that as if you have a proprietary product and you're wanting to sell it over into China in particular? I don't think the same situation exists in Korea or in Japan. But if you want to sell something in China, how do you protect yourself?
Great question. I have a lot of experience in this area. I'll start with a story. So this was maybe 15 years ago, and I'm in the biomedical space, and I was uh, with my business school. With alumni, they had invited us to come down to China at the Shenzhen Business Park, which is just outside of Shanghai. And so there's all the major US companies, all the major, they're all the pharma, all the device companies, everybody. And this was, 15, 17 years ago when, there was a focus and a strategy to go to India, to go to China. So they built up these big parks and, you know, the whole issue of employees, that's another one, by the way, because they move around a lot. It's not like the US. They will sit and talk to each other. And, if you're at that company here, company A, company B, they will, you know, tell you exactly how much their salary is. And they'll say, come over here and come over. So it's a very kind of a different sort of workforce than we have in the US. Besides the point. So I was invited with my alumni, and we went with a group to that research park, which also happened to have my client in there, huge, device company. And I remember going into this small company. It's also a biomedical device, and they made stents. And they invited us into this
Hmm.
room, this one corporate room, and they had their research product catalog, and I started flipping through it. And I was like, this looks familiar. Not familiar. It looks almost exactly like what I saw. And so, and then I remember the CEO came in. She was a lady. Chinese lady around in her 45, around 45 to 50, well dressed, well, very poised. And then she started talking to us about biomedical device. And within about 10 minutes, I realized she really didn't know a thing about biomedical devices. So my understanding is some of these Chinese, and this may have changed. Again, this was a long time ago. A lot of these Chinese companies create a partnership. And back in the day, and again, I don't know if the law has changed, but you would require to have a local partner. So
Hmm.
those local partner, you have to do business with a local partner.
It
and you
was
would
the only
have to do.
way.
It was the only way, and you would have to do something called a I forget the name of the, maybe it was a green sheet, but you had to, disclose and agree and exchange information. And, when I saw this, it was it's clear what it was. You get a local partner, the local partner learns everything you need to do.
If it
And then they
smells
set up
like
their
it,
show. It's exactly what it is. And I think, if you're an executive though at a US company, those profits are they're still salivating. They're like, we got to be in the market. There's just no way. And so, you know, uh, Fortune 500s, I think, have some of the smartest people on the planet. Some people say large companies are big and dumb. No, I think some of the very smartest people are in those companies, and they knew exactly what was happening. They knew exactly. But at the end of the line, you have profit and you have shareholders, and you have a window, which I think they were aware of, where you can extract, and make money as much as you can. And if that's what's driving it, this is the outcome, and you know, completely expected. So again, huge company, US, outpost in China, small company. I looked in their product catalog was exactly the same. It was one of the funny, and I remember calling my client. I say, "Hey, do you know about it?" Nothing was, they showed it to me. So I was like,
yeah. So we're running out of time. So tell me who your ideal client is.
my ideal client is a group or individual that is invested in what they want to do, believes in their product, professional, um, and loves technology and knows what. And I respect and admire capabilities and people who are professional and know what they're doing. So my ideal client is a professional who likes what they do, who likes technology and is trying to deliver the best for their client or for their company, for the enterprise.
And then your job is to protect what it is that they've built.
Correct. And deliver value. So I think so. I'm going to get on my soapbox. There's many cases where many firms and they will just create a stack or a pile. That used to actually be. I won't name names, but that was the strategy. My stack is bigger than yours. Are you going to fight me? I'll find something. I think it's more precise these days. Budgets are smaller, and you have tools that allow you to attack it with precision. So I think that is the way the system is going, and especially with this AI to AI prosecution, I think. And again, so Elon Musk, you know, one of my favorite guys, but also he's very anti-patent. I don't know if you're familiar with
No,
that.
I
Jack
wasn't
Dorsey.
aware of that. It's no, I didn't know that.
Yeah, many of them are, and even a lot of the AI proponents are patents are cooked. The whole system is cooked, and the idea, and it sounds smart, is why protect your idea with a patent, which takes 2 or 3 years to get, when AI, the innovation cycle compresses down to a few days. So by the time you get your patent, you're already out of the loop and someone has designed around you. So to them, the patent system is cooked. But I think that's the wrong approach. It's not the right question because patents, if you back up, these serve the primary function of patents is public disclosure. I think most people overlook that, or Silicon Valley has forgotten that. Primary idea of patents is that you have to disclose sufficient such that one of ordinary skill can read your patent and make your invention. And the barter, the exchange for that is that you get a limited monopoly for 20 years from the filing date to monetize your invention. That's the basic bargain between patents. The government, the US government, will give you a monopoly power over your idea so you can recoup your investment. In exchange, you got to make your idea public to the world so the rest of the world can build off of it going on to the future. So now you have a corpus of patents over the last 200 years, millions of documents that describe all the most significant innovations in the last 200 years. What is that? That's training data. That's a corpus that will
Hmm.
train training data. And you have an incentive system where you disclose, and so you can build off of that continually. And I think that's what's overlooked continually. You want people to disclose. If you keep everything in a trade secret, think about how far back we would be right now. And there's a couple examples of that. So what I think is the issue is that we don't abandon the patent system. We just accelerate it. If time and efficiency are the biggest concerns, are the biggest complaints about the patent system, let's just make it faster. So instead of waiting 3 to 5 years for a patent, compress it down into months. So
So
now,
how the hell do you do that? Because I have several patents, and they both got violated. But it took a long time to get those through, and then to defend them was just like it's so much money to defend your position that it was like you know decided no, we're not going to do that. It was just the return wasn't there. So um, now I went afield there, and I lost my train of thought.
so how do we achieve that? I think you know my
Quicker,
answer.
yeah. So how do you get it
AI,
done more quickly? That was where I was going.
AI. So right now, Director Squire, who's the new director at the USPTO, he's launched a lot of tools and efforts which have been around actually, but they're really taking advantage where you use AI. So now I use AI to draft the patents. Patent office uses AI to examine the patents. So eventually, you have AI to AI working together, and you compress that time frame down from months to hopefully from years down to months, perhaps to days. Who knows? Maybe even to seconds. Right now, there's a couple barriers here. So there's paper, right? You got to file PDF documents,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of it is just formalities. Imagine if you could create an API, which surprisingly the patent office doesn't have yet. There's no API for prosecuting patent. They have one for downloading documents, but for the prosecution process, it's still paper. You still fill out forms and you submit it, which is shocking to me. Imagine
Yeah.
if it was an API with JSON, you could get the application ready and in right order in minutes, right? Instead of months. So I think there's a lot of technical objectives that they need to meet. And once they're implemented, the idea of having patents continually filed and processed, valuable patents, very quickly, so it lives in the stage of, in the world of AI in 2026, not, patent prosecution in 2020 or 1995, where it takes years. Now you move it and accelerate it to months. This system makes sense.
So I think we're going to wind it up right there because I'm sorry I would just go on for too long, just because it's of interest to me. So thanks a lot for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.